The wind howled through the trees outside as Sarah sat quietly in the parlor of the old house. The room was filled with an air of finality, as though the walls themselves held their breath. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had passed away just days ago, leaving behind a legacy of warmth, kindness, and endless stories of days gone by. But now, as Sarah sifted through the paperwork left in her grandmother's study, a sense of unease crept into her chest. The funeral was over, the relatives had returned to their own lives, and Sarah had come to begin the process of sorting through the belongings of the woman she had loved so much. Eleanor had been a pillar of the family. She was the one everyone turned to for advice, the one who hosted Sunday dinners and holidays, the one who always seemed to know the right thing to say in any situation. But Sarah had never truly understood her grandmother. There had always been something hidden beneath the surface, a shadow that flickered in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Something she had always kept just out of reach. As Sarah carefully opened a leather-bound box, she found her grandmother's will. She had seen the document before, but today, as she read it once more, her eyes lingered over one particular section. A letter. Her grandmother's handwriting was neat, each stroke deliberate and purposeful. "Sarah," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. I'm sorry for the burden this letter places on you, but it is time that the truth be known. A secret, one that has haunted me for many years, must be revealed. You, my dear, are the one who must carry this knowledge forward." Sarah's heart raced as she continued reading. The words were like a slow, unraveling thread, each sentence tightening the knot of confusion in her mind. "I kept this secret because I thought I was protecting you and the family from pain. But it is no longer my place to hold on to this burden. It is time for you to know the truth. Your father is not your biological father." The words seemed to blur before her eyes. She blinked hard, trying to focus, but they only became more real, more haunting. "Not your biological father." Her mind struggled to piece it together. What was her grandmother talking about? Sarah read on, her fingers trembling as she held the paper in her hands. "Your real father is someone who walked out of our lives long ago, someone I have kept hidden from you all these years. I never told your mother or anyone because I didn't want to destroy the family. But now, in my absence, I hope you will understand why I made the choice I did. I hope you can forgive me." The letter went on to explain details she wasn't yet ready to process, but the essence of it was clear. Eleanor, her grandmother, had kept a secret that had changed the course of their family's history. Her real father. Sarah's mind kept repeating the words, the world around her spinning with the weight of this revelation. Who was this man? Why had Eleanor kept him hidden for so long? And most importantly, what would it mean for Sarah and her family? Now that the truth had come to light, there was no way she could understand it all in that moment. But one thing was certain: everything she thought she knew about her family was about to change. As Sarah sat back in the chair, the letter still clutched in her hands, her thoughts swirled in a storm of confusion and disbelief. The house, which had once been filled with the comforting presence of her grandmother, now felt cold and distant, as though the walls were closing in on her. She had always felt a strange sense of connection to her grandmother, an inexplicable bond that went beyond the usual love between generations. But now she realized that bond might have been built on lies, or at least on the omission of some very crucial truths. She sat there for what felt like hours, the words on the page echoing in her mind. And then, slowly, she gathered herself, folding the letter carefully and slipping it into her pocket. She needed to talk to her mother. She needed answers, but the question gnawed at her. What would her mother say? The morning sun filtered softly through the window, casting long shadows across the room as Sarah paced back and forth. The letter her grandmother had left her felt heavier in her pocket with every passing minute. It was as though the truth had settled into her bones, waiting to be uncovered, waiting for her to finally face it. But where to start? Her mind raced with questions, each one tumbling over the next. Who is this man? Why did Eleanor keep him a secret? What does this mean for my family? She hadn't spoken to her mother about the letter yet. The thought of confronting her mother with such a revelation made her stomach churn. Her mother, Rebecca, had always been the steady one, the one who kept the family together. She'd never given any indication that there was anything out of the ordinary in their family history. But now, Sarah wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The decision was clear, though. She needed to talk to her mother. If there was any chance of finding out the whole story, it would be through Rebecca. She just hoped her mother would be willing to open up. Taking a deep breath, Sarah called her mother's phone number, watching the screen as it rang. She needed to be prepared for whatever came next. "Hello?" Rebecca's voice came through, a little more cheerful than Sarah expected. "Hey, Mom," Sarah said, her voice wavering slightly. "Do you have a minute? I need to talk to you about something." Rebecca paused, the cheerfulness in her voice replaced with concern. "Of course, honey. What's wrong?" I found something. A letter from Grandma." Sarah's voice caught, but she pressed on. "It's about Dad. About my real father." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Sarah could almost hear her mother's breath hitch. Then, finally, Rebecca spoke, her voice quiet and tentative. "What did the letter say?" "I don't know exactly. I haven't read it all yet, but it says that Dad isn't my real father, that there's someone else, someone Grandma kept hidden from us. Do you know anything about this?" Another silence hung between them. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. Sarah's heart pounded as she waited for her mother's response. Rebecca's voice was shaky, a note of fear creeping into her words. "This is not something I've ever wanted to talk about. But I think it's time you knew. It's time for you to understand." "Mom, please," Sarah urged, her throat tightening. "I don't understand any of this. I need to know the truth. Who is he? Why didn't you tell me?" There was a long, shaky exhale on the other end of the line before her mother spoke again, her words slow and deliberate. "Your father, the man you've always known as Dad, isn't your biological father. The man your grandmother is talking about, his name was Thomas. He was a part of our lives for a short time when I was young. A long time ago, your grandmother and we both made choices that we thought were right, that we thought would protect you. I never wanted to hurt you, but the truth is, the secret we've kept, it's been like a shadow over our lives." The weight of her mother's words hit Sarah like a tidal wave. She sat down abruptly on the couch, feeling the room spin around her. Thomas. Who was this man? Why had he been kept a secret for so long? And why hadn't her mother told her about him before? "Why didn't you tell me, Mom?" Sarah asked, her voice raw. "Why didn't you tell me the truth about my father, about who I really am?" Her mother's voice softened, filled with a mixture of guilt and sadness. "Because, sweetheart, sometimes the truth is too painful. I thought that by keeping it from you, I was protecting you from the hurt, from the chaos that came with it. But I see now that I was wrong. I should have told you, and I should have let you decide how to process it. But I was scared. I didn't know how to make sense of it all." Sarah's mind spun, trying to grasp the reality of what her mother was saying. The foundation of her entire life was suddenly cracked open, revealing a fissure of truth she hadn't known existed. "Where is Thomas now? Is he still alive?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rebecca hesitated before answering. "No, he passed away years ago, but the scars of those days, they've stayed with me, Sarah. It's been a secret I've carried for so long, and I thought it was something I could bury. But now you need to know, you deserve to know." The silence between them stretched out again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. Sarah felt a deep, overwhelming sadness for her mother. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, the weight of keeping such a secret, the fear of shattering the image of a perfect family, the fear of losing everything for the sake of honesty. "Is there anything else I need to know?" Sarah asked softly. Her mind was swirling with questions, and yet she knew there was more to this story, more that hadn't been said. Her mother took a deep breath before replying, "I think you should meet him, Sarah. Thomas, the man who's your biological father. I think you should know who he was, and I think it's time you understand the full story. But it's not something I can give you. It's something you'll have to discover for yourself." "Where do I even start?" Sarah asked, feeling the enormity of the situation settling over her like a blanket. "I'll help you," her mother said, her voice firm, though still laced with the remnants of regret. "I'll help you find out what you need to know. Just promise me you won't hate me for keeping this from you." "I don't hate you, Mom," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I need time to process this." She paused, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what the next step was, or even where to start looking for answers. But one thing was clear: this was a journey she would have to take on her own. To find the truth. To uncover the man she never knew. And perhaps to understand why her grandmother had carried this secret to her grave. It was late afternoon when Sarah decided to follow her mother's advice. The weight of the truth was heavy on her shoulders, and though the journey ahead seemed daunting, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was something she had to do. The need for answers gnawed at her, each question unanswerable, without knowing the man who had once been part of her family, part of her story. Her mother, Rebecca, had given her the name of a small town upstate, a place where Thomas had lived, before he disappeared from their lives. "If you want to understand who he was, start there," her mother had said, the regret still evident in her voice. "I think it's time you get the full story." The drive was long, and as Sarah passed, the miles of winding roads, the landscape began to shift, the houses growing more sparse as the city gave way to open fields and dense forests. The place her mother had mentioned was nestled in the quiet of upstate New York, a town with a name she had never heard of, Mill Creek. It wasn't the bustling metropolis of the city where she had spent most of her life. No, this place felt like a time capsule, a snapshot of an era long forgotten. She wondered if the people here even remembered her father, Thomas, and if they did, would they have any answers for her? As the GPS directed her down a narrow road lined with old trees, Sarah felt the first flicker of doubt. What if this was a mistake? What if uncovering the truth only caused more pain? The idea of stepping into the past was terrifying, but there was no turning back now. She parked the car in front of a small local diner. The faded sign read, "Mill Creek Cafe," its edges weathered by time. Stepping out, she felt the chill of the early autumn air bite into her skin. The scent of coffee and baked goods drifted from the door, offering a momentary comfort before she braced herself for what was to come. Inside, the cafe was cozy, with old wooden floors and mismatched tables that spoke of years of service to the locals. A few patrons sat at the counter, sipping coffee and chatting quietly, the kind of atmosphere that felt both timeless and distant. The waitress behind the counter gave Sarah a polite but disinterested smile as she approached. "What can I get for you, hun?" she asked, her accent heavy with the drawl of the region. Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I'm actually looking for information. I don't know if you'll remember—" She paused, feeling the weight of her words. "But I'm trying to find someone who used to live here. His name was Thomas Caldwell." At the mention of the name, the waitress's face shifted. It wasn't a visible change, not a clear sign of recognition, But Sarah could feel it, a subtle shift in the air, as if the room had grown a little quieter. The waitress put down the cup she had been wiping and looked directly at Sarah. "Caldwell, you say?" the woman said slowly, as if testing the name. "Thomas was a good man back in the day, but it's been years since he left. I know he had a lot of history here, but it's a bit of a sensitive subject now. People don't talk much about him anymore." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Sensitive subject. She couldn't imagine what that could mean, but the dread that began to rise within her only fueled her need for answers. "Do you know where he went? Or if anyone here knew him well?" Sarah pressed, her voice growing more urgent. She could feel the walls of the town closing in on her, as though it was reluctant to let its past be uncovered. The waitress's gaze softened slightly, as if seeing the desperation in Sarah's eyes. "There's one person who might still remember him well. Marge, over at the general store. She and Thomas were close, back in the day. Maybe she'll talk to you." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She thanked the waitress and headed toward the door, her mind racing. Marge! The name echoed in her mind. A possible key to unlocking the secrets that had been buried for decades. The walk to the general store was short, and as Sarah approached the small building, she couldn't help but feel as though she was stepping back in time. The faded signs in the window, the creaking of the door as she entered. It was like something straight out of an old photograph. Inside, the air smelled of pine and aged wood. A few shelves lined the walls, stocked with canned goods, local honey and handmade trinkets. Behind the counter, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes looked up from a crossword puzzle. "You're looking for something, miss?" Marge's voice was gravelly yet warm, as she folded the paper and set it aside. Sarah hesitated, unsure of how to approach the subject. "I'm looking for someone who used to live here," she began. "His name was Thomas Caldwell." Marge's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of the name, and for a brief moment Sarah could see the weight of recognition flash across her face. "Thomas, huh? That's a name I haven't heard in a long time," Marge said slowly. "What do you want to know about him?" I'm his daughter," Sarah said, the words coming out in a rush, as though she were holding her breath. The confession hung in the air like a fragile thing, vulnerable and raw. Marge's expression softened, and she motioned for Sarah to sit. "Sit down, dear. I think you're going to want to hear this." Sarah took a seat, the tension in her body not yet easing, but the promise of answers pulling her in. "Thomas wasn't always the man he seemed," Marge began, her voice low, as if speaking about a ghost. "He had his demons, but he was good-hearted. When he left here, it wasn't under the best of circumstances, but there's a reason no one talks about him. There's a reason your mother never told you the truth." Sarah's stomach twisted. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. "What happened?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marge took a deep breath, her eyes clouded with memories. "Thomas was involved in something that had a long-lasting effect on the people who knew him. Something he regretted deeply. But it's not my place to say more. You'll have to talk to your mother about that. She's the one who has the full story." The evening light was beginning to fade as Sarah left the general store, her mind still racing with the fragmentary information Marge had shared. Her fingers clutched the steering wheel tighter as she drove back to the cafe parking lot, the echoes of Marge's words repeating in her mind. "There's a reason no one talks about him. Something your mother knows. She's the one who has the full story." It was like a puzzle, each piece barely fitting together, but enough to shape an image. She needed to go back to her mother, confront her with everything she had learned. Sarah wasn't sure what to expect, but the weight of the silence surrounding her family was growing unbearable. Her phone buzzed in her hand as she pulled into the cafe parking lot. It was a message from her mother. "Sarah, I think we need to talk. Come home. We'll discuss everything." Her stomach clenched. She could feel the walls of her world slowly closing in. The truth, whatever it was finally about to surface. She drove back home in a blur, the world outside her window passing by in a haze. When she finally pulled into the driveway, Sarah's heart raced. The house was quiet. Too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Her mother was waiting inside, sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Sarah stood at the doorway for a long moment, gathering the courage to say what was on her mind. The letter from her grandmother, Marge's cryptic warnings. Everything had led to this moment. There was no more running from the truth. "Mom," Sarah began, her voice steady but soft. "I went to Mill Creek today. I spoke to some people who knew Thomas. They said you know everything, that you're the one who has the full story." Rebecca's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and sorrow, but she didn't answer immediately. She stared down at the table, her fingers drumming nervously on the surface. Finally she looked up, her face etched with guilt and regret. "I was hoping you wouldn't find out this way," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse. "I was hoping you would never have to know the things I've kept from you. But you're right, Sarah. You deserve the truth." Rebecca took a long, deep breath, then let it out slowly. Sarah waited, barely able to hold back the flood of questions, pressing against her chest. "Thomas," Rebecca began, but then her voice faltered. She closed her eyes as if steeling herself for what was to come. "Thomas wasn't just someone your grandmother hid from us. He was the reason I left Mill Creek, the reason I ran. You see, he wasn't just a man from the past. He was part of something dangerous, something I thought I could escape." Sarah's pulse quickened. This was it. The truth that had been hidden for so long was finally coming into focus. "After I met him," Rebecca continued, "I thought he was the man I'd been waiting for. He was kind, loving, everything I ever wanted. But then I found out what he was really involved in. It wasn't just petty crime, Sarah. It was bigger than that. Thomas was involved with a group that had ties to underground activities. They were dangerous, and I had no idea how deep it went until it was too late." Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she continued, her gaze fixed on her daughter's face. "I never wanted you to know about it. After I left, I thought I could protect you by keeping you away from him, away from everything he was involved in. But the truth is, I was just as scared of what would happen if the world ever found out. And when I realized I was pregnant with you, I knew I had to disappear, to build a life that was as far from that world as possible. I kept it from everyone, even your grandmother. I thought she'd never forgive me for what I did." Sarah sat in stunned silence, the weight of her mother's words crashing over her. Her mind was struggling to catch up with the reality of it all. Thomas, the man who had been part of her past, wasn't just an absent father. He was part of something dark, something dangerous. And her mother had spent years keeping that secret to protect her. So, Thomas was part of a criminal organization. Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did he ever come back after he left? Did he know about me?" Rebecca nodded slowly. "He knew. He found out eventually, after I left Mill Creek. He tried to reach out to me to apologize, but I couldn't let him in. I couldn't let that part of my life back in. Not with you. Not with the life we were trying to build." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. She hadn't expected to hear this much, hadn't expected to find out that her biological father wasn't just a man who had walked away, but someone deeply entangled in something far more sinister than she could have imagined. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I could have handled it. I could have understood." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as well. "I didn't want to burden you with this. I didn't want you to grow up with the knowledge of this dark side of your family, this shadow hanging over you. I wanted you to have a normal life, Sarah. I wanted to protect you from all of it." Sarah wiped away the tears that had gathered. At the corners of her eyes, this wasn't the family she had grown up with. This was a new world she was being introduced to, a world of secrets and lies, of choices made to protect her, but at the cost of her understanding. "I thought I was protecting you," Rebecca whispered, her voice breaking. "But now I see that I was wrong. I should have told you. I should have let you be a part of the truth, even if it hurt." Sarah sat in silence, trying to process everything. She had always known there were pieces of her family's past she didn't understand, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Thomas had been a ghost in her life, a name, a memory, but not a person she could touch. And now he was gone. His legacy, however, was still alive in the stories and secrets that had been passed down through the years. "Do you know where he is now?" Sarah asked softly, breaking the silence. Rebecca shook her head. "No, I don't. I haven't heard from him in years. I think he disappeared for good, but I never wanted you to get caught up in his past. That's why I kept the truth from you." Sarah nodded slowly, her heart heavy with the weight of the knowledge she had uncovered. The story wasn't over, but for now it was a story she needed to carry with her. There was no easy way to face this truth, no simple resolution. But one thing was clear: the silence had been broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, with Sarah trying to process everything she had learned about her family. The knowledge that her father, Thomas, had been involved in something so dangerous and far-reaching left her shaken. Even more unsettling was the realization that her mother, Rebecca, had spent her entire life shielding her from it, shielding her from the truth. In the quiet moments, Sarah could hear the echoes of the life she thought she had known. Her childhood, so carefully constructed around love and safety, was now overshadowed by the dark undercurrents of a past she had never been allowed to glimpse. It was as though she had been living in the light, unaware of the shadows that lay just beneath the surface. Despite her confusion and the aching hole where the truth had once been hidden, Sarah found herself growing closer to her mother. The woman who had protected her, who had been her anchor, was now the one who needed her support. The roles had shifted. Sarah had become the one to offer comfort, to hold her mother's hand, and assure her that, even though everything was different, they would face it together. One evening, as the autumn sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah found herself sitting across from Rebecca at the kitchen table. The silence between them felt less oppressive now, but there was still an air of unspoken understanding, a quiet recognition that they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. "I know I can't change the past," Rebecca said softly, her voice laced with regret. "But I need you to know that I did what I thought was best for you. I wanted you to have a normal life away from all of this. I wanted you to have a future that wasn't clouded by the choices I made." Sarah nodded, the weight of her mother's words heavy in her chest. She understood more than she had before, now that she could see the sacrifices her mother had made. Rebecca had carried the burden of their family's secret alone, believing it was the only way to protect her daughter from the legacy of a man who had chosen to disappear from their lives. "You did what you thought was right," Sarah replied, softly, her voice filled with compassion. "And I'm still here. We're still here." Rebecca's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and Sarah reached across the table, taking her mother's hand in hers. It wasn't about forgiveness. Not yet. It was about understanding. The bond between them was still strong, still unbroken. By the secrets that had once divided them, "Maybe it's time," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Maybe it's time for me to let go of the past, too. I can't change what happened, but I can choose how I move forward." Rebecca gave her a small, shaky smile. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. I hope you can find peace with all of this. I know it's not easy, but it's your story now, too." Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time since she had uncovered the truth, she felt a sense of clarity. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer had to define her. The family she had known, the love they shared was real, no matter what secrets had been buried. In the following weeks, Sarah began to heal. She took her mother's words to heart and started to forge her own path, no longer tethered by the ghosts of a past she couldn't change. The town of Mill Creek and the life that Thomas had left behind faded into the background as Sarah focused on what mattered now: her future, her family, and the relationships that had been forged through years of love and sacrifice. But as she tried to move forward, there were still moments when the weight of the past would return. She would find herself thinking about Thomas, about the man she would never truly know. She wondered what kind of person he had been. Beyond the dangerous choices that had shaped his life, was there any part of him that was good? Was there any part of him she could have loved? One day, as Sarah sat in her mother's living room, flipping through a box of old photos from her childhood, her eyes landed on a picture of Thomas, taken years before he had disappeared. He was smiling, young and full of life, before the shadows had claimed him. It was a reminder of the man her mother had once loved, the man who had once been a part of their lives. She set the photo down carefully, her fingers lingering on the edges for a moment longer than necessary. It was time to let go. The truth had been revealed, and she could no longer hold on to the pain of not knowing. She didn't need to find out everything about her father. She only needed to accept that his absence was part of her story. But it didn't define who she was, and with that acceptance came a sense of peace. As the days passed, Sarah began to rebuild her own narrative, one where the past no longer held her captive. She found strength in the love and support of her mother, and together they faced the future with a newfound sense of understanding. The secrets of the past might have cast long shadows, but Sarah was no longer afraid of them. The family secret had been unearthed, and while it would always be a part of their history, it no longer controlled their lives. Sarah knew that healing was a process and that it would take time, but she also knew that she was no longer alone in facing it. And so, she took a deep breath, letting the weight of the past slip from her shoulders, and stepped into the future, ready to embrace whatever came next.